Okay, we're on the record now. It is 7:05 p.m. This is the meeting of the Affordable Housing Committee on Wednesday, July 15th. On the phone, I have committee members Cindy, Steve, Helene, Sheila, Nancy, and Carrie. I also have the recording secretary, Gretchen. Also on the phone are Jan Reber and Frank Sweeney. I don't know if I missed anyone, but feel free to introduce yourself. And then I would ask everyone, if you're not talking, to put your phone on mute so that we can not eliminate any background noise. Anyone else on the phone? Okay, Mr. Chairman, take it away.
Okay. So tonight's meeting has two primary topics for discussion, in addition to approval of the minutes. We're going to talk about the Housing Trust Fund and ideas about soliciting proposals and review of those proposals. And we're going to talk about potentially joining with the Fairfield Senior Advocates to propose to Tpz that they amend the the accessory dwelling unit regulations, Section 6 of the zoning regs. But let's start with, we have the minutes from our June 10th meeting and then our June 22nd special meeting. And I would take a motion to approve both.
I make a motion to approve both minutes. This is Cindy.
And thank you for identifying yourself. And do I have a second?
Wait, this is Nancy. There's on one of them, it says that there are comments from Catherine Griff at the end of the minutes, and those comments are not there.
Yes, Nancy. Can you hold that comment until we get the second, and then we'll open it up for discussion?
Okay.
Not to be too technical, but yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I second it.
Now, thank you, Nancy. And now you can make your comment because I noticed that too.
Yeah, I believe it's the July. Is it the July 15th?
Well, they were appended. They were appended before. I don't know where they went.
They were on mine when I just printed it out before. So
okay. So the one to the Adair
it's possible you printed it out and maybe it got lost or something.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the ones that Adair sent on Friday.
Yeah, I do too. I don't see it attached.
So Gretchen, maybe you could just circulate just that appendix. I think.
And which date
can we approve the minutes without seeing them, or do we want to hold them over?
Well, there's not going to change the fact that the comments were made, so I don't see why you would have to hold them off. It was listed on the minutes that we filed with the town clerk.
Yeah. And the town clerk did get the appendix. Is that correct?
I know I appended them to it.
Yeah. That they are downloadable from the website with the Catherine's comments, so they are there.
All right. So, Gretchen, if you have them readily available, if you could circulate them so we don't all have to go hunting for them on the website, that would be great.
Okay. I'll see what I can do.
And I have one other comment regarding 131 Beach Road. It says it's a 4-story residential building. I believe it's 5-story. It's 4 above 1 story of parking.
That's my understanding as well.
Yeah. And I have no comments on the special meeting from June 22nd. If nobody else has any comments, can we raise their hand and approve the minutes, or I'm not quite sure how we do this when we can't see each other. I guess a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed,
Aye.
say nay. No nays. Okay, it's passed. Good. Okay, so before I ask Sheila to present her information on the Affordable Housing Committee, the Housing Trust Fund, I wanted to just read a little bit from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund regulation, just to put it in some context. The purpose, when this was enacted, the purpose was to provide affordable housing for the town of Fairfield, and expenditures from the fund, it reads, such expenditures shall be made exclusively for the costs associated with the investigation, appraisal, acquisition, constructing, rehabilitating, repairing, administration, fees, and maintenance costs relating to parcels of land, both improved and unimproved, or development rights, easements, deed restrictions, options, interest or rights therein, the use of which shall be limited to retention or designation of parcels for their long-term use in providing affordable housing within the meaning of 830G. And so I read that pretty broadly, that if it's any way attached to affordable housing, the trust fund dollars can be used for that. So, and with that, before Sheila starts, Mark, can you tell us what the current balance is in the fund?
It remains unchanged at $772,000 as of today.
772.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Okay, and October, November, December. Just one other thing is that's about 20 months. So we're adding like 40,000 a month on average, and I'm sure that it spikes up and down. Okay, Sheila, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thanks. I'm not going to take up too much of time, but that's a very good point, Steve. I should cut and paste some of these things that are already, obviously, in the regs and allowed as a, informational point to anybody who's looking to submit what we decide is either a pre-application or a letter of intent. It certainly should speak directly to the inclusionary zoning regs. So I will make sure once we're ready that those are in there in some, like a bullet point. So that would make sense to me. So I kind of just went along the lines of what we've talked about, what Steve has emailed, and kind of just drew those points together in a timeline sort of format. The first question we have is, how do we get the word out about the funds? How do we want to take in applications? Do we want to put out a notice? So that you all know, I'm probably said it before, Community Development Block Grant Administrator for the City of Milford. I worked with Mark doing the same thing in Fairfield for about 20 years. So it's kind of based on a little bit of what we've already done, what we do in the normal business of making grants for block grants. So we have a lot of paperwork, and we have a lot of applications. So this is, I'm drawing from that experience as well. And my side gig is the affordable housing, 830G. I, for the City of Milford, review the plans, the affordability plans. I have, when I took over the job 5 years ago, there wasn't a boilerplate. We have a boilerplate. I think Mark probably uses very close to the same thing. It was provided through the Department of Housing. So I'm drawing off of that. As far as what a deed restriction, what's required in 830G, it's very standard. It is also very standard just in CDBG, regular, both Mark and I, when we make loans for repairs, there's always a deed restriction. There's a mortgage deed. That secures the loan, even if it's a 0% interest loan. Okay, that ensures in the end that if somebody were to sell the property, the funds would be recovered. That's the idea. It's never fail-proof. Don't get me wrong. Nothing in this business is fail-proof. Everybody in each point of that transaction has to do what they're supposed to do in order for the intention to manifest itself, no matter if it's, the deed restriction or actually renting to income-eligible households. So that kind of speaks to Steve's last point about his last email. So I added that, Steve, your last email regarding the affordability plan, the inclusionary zoning, not mentioning how to actually verify income. That could be something we request. We could also, I didn't add in here, affordability plan. That could be something we request. As far as down the road, once it's actually approved and after that, right? So that's kind of farther down the timeline into beyond.
Sheila, let me ask a question for you and for
Sure.
Mark. The first bold topic on this was proposal solicitation and acceptance. Yeah. And do you get more requests, better quality requests, if you have a NOFA or a RFQ, or if you put a 2-inch by 2-inch ad in the paper or a 5-inch by 4-inch ad in the paper? What draws the best responses?
Well, I think the best response is usually drawn through first the transparency, so I would recommend a notice of funding availability. It can apply to any kind of funding, and when it's municipal, that would certainly apply to municipal funding, which this falls into that category. Like anything, to get the best results, even from a bid, project bid, the best way to do it is multiple ways. There's not one way that is better than the other. That sometimes one way nets you more responses than another. That's why it would be better to take a multifaceted approach. And that's why I wrote down request for qualifications, what that actually is, versus a request for a proposal. And so that's kind of getting in the minutia there. But in my mind, you can't go to an RFP unless you actually have a specific opportunity or property to notice. And that could be one aspect of using this fund. You've pointed out a number of times the town does not want to be managing or building or constructing. That's true. The town could end up with a piece of property which it would like to have developed, and in that case, you could do an RFQ or an RFP. You could do an RFQ just to get a pre-qualified list of developers, builders, nonprofits who are interested in future the pre-qualification is kind of nice sometimes, but it's kind of one of those things where I don't know if it really fits this what our mission is here. I don't know how you feel about that, Mark. It doesn't seem to really make sense to do an RFQ.
Well, let me ask Mark specifically, Sheila.
Yeah.
So, Mark, when we had that playground over on Villa that the Parks Department gave us, and Mutual Housing, now called Connecticut Housing Partners, I think it is, developed the Section 202. Did the town do an RFP or an RFQ, or did we just reach out to people that we knew had the capacity?
No, we go through a formal process, but the difference is that you have a specific location, a site that you control. In both instances, where we're looking at the redevelopment of the Navy housing site, and for the property you're mentioning, the town owned the property or had site control or had the ability to secure site control. So we were actually soliciting for a very specific project, and we went through an RFQ process to determine, the qualifications of the potential development partner before you go to an RFP. And I think that is an important component of this. I think before you go down this path, I think you should start laying some groundwork by reaching out to housing developers. Could be private, for-profit that specialize in affordable housing, but more likely it's going to be nonprofit, and talk to them a little bit more about what you're attempting to accomplish here, what your goals are. I think you have to be very specific in terms of what you bring into the table and what you're trying to achieve as an outcome before you go soliciting, putting out a notice of funding availability. You're going to get potentially a bunch of people that are applying thinking it's free money, and they have absolutely no business, you have no business working with them because they just don't have enough information. It's not necessarily a fault of theirs, but you have to be very specific in terms of what you're trying to drive as the outcome, what you're bringing to the table, and what you're looking for in a development partner. So you don't
Absolutely.
get people that aren't remotely qualified to just putting out a flyer because you're going to spend a lot of time going through that, and that's just a waste of everyone's time and effort.
Right.
Well, so these are,
when you guys
say that take that into consideration.
Excuse me. Wait, I got a question for you guys that have community development block grant funds, and so you might have a rehab program already established. You just notify the public that you've got the program and the funds, don't you? Do you do a mailing to individual property owners? You don't do an RFQ.
No, we have, and I'm sure Sheila does the same thing in Milford. We've done direct mailings to property owners that own rental properties, and we've also put out press releases or media announcements going through a similar process saying, hey, we have this program, but again, it's a very specific program. So it's for an investor-owned property, 2, 3, 4 family house. Somebody's looking to make improvements, and in exchange for our providing funds to make those improvements to maintain the quality of the housing stock, we're expecting 51% of the units, over half, to be deed restricted for a period of time to make them affordable, depending on the amount of investment that we make. So again, it's very specific, so people can then look at that and make a determination of whether that's something that they're interested in and want to pursue. But for this, really, as you mentioned at the outset, Steve, you've got a lot of things that you could potentially fund. I think you should try to narrow it down a little bit before we put out a notice of funding availability, because it'll be all over the map unless that's what you want. But I just think you're going to spend a lot of time.
No. I don't think that's what Steve intended. I think that's just, that was the first question that was on his list, so I kind of formatted it that way. But it's certainly, Mark is absolutely correct. the criteria that's already laid out in inclusionary zoning has to be narrowed down. We kind of have to have a starting point. We could do a first round with certain points in that. Doesn't mean we have to, just because it's a wide range, we have to go for all of them at the same time. But yeah, you wouldn't put out a notice of funding until you actually knew what you were looking for people to come back with. Absolutely. So, that's my mistake. I didn't put the criteria first, but the criteria is kind of needs to be whittled down and already a known factor because it's in regs. So, but
I didn't take it as a mistake. No, not at all. I was just being very specific on it.
It's good to draw it out because I know other folks are necessarily in the business, and it can be kind of like a cutting between the lines here. So, but anyway, to that point, once we know what we're going to put in request or what we're looking for. The notice of funding availability can go out to the public. It can go directly to hand-picked developers and builders, people we know have already worked successfully with the town, who have good reputations. Mark says, and I agree, a nonprofit with the mission of housing development is usually going to adhere to the requirements. And even if it's not specifically stated, their mission is to create affordable housing like Operation Hope, but there are many other organizations besides Operation Hope that we could just reach out to. So it'd be multiple ways of reaching out besides just a blanket, publishing a notice in the paper.
If we had a property, we could do like a RFQ. If we had a program design, we could do a NOFA, I guess. Maybe we could use the funds even in conjunction with the amended accessory dwelling unit regs, so we could help fund legalizing those units.
Yes. And I have that on there. When you go down to HTF purpose, let's see, proposal. That's kind of added
on page 2.
Legal property requirements. Yeah. HTF purpose.
Yeah.
How many units? So I thought a very important point for our real estate experts on the committee are to get us what the marketing analysis or marketing needs. What do we need? Do we need studios? Do we need, 1 bedrooms? Are we looking for 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms? Number of units. Are we looking for people to develop, obviously a rehab of a single family home would net 2 to 3 bedrooms maybe, but, multifamily. So is it a minimum? Is it a maximum? Is it under 9 units? With the, that's something to think about. With the HTF being under 9 units, because the inclusionary is over 10, so we might want to, not mix those things together. Obviously, you don't want to surpass the 9 units, I would think. And then, new construction. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say one other suggestion, since we're, kind of in information gathering mode, is the committee may want to consider hosting a workshop with some of our potential housing development partners, where we ask them, what it is that they need most to facilitate the creation of affordable housing. What kinds of assistance? How would it be structured? What would they do with it? Maybe kind of get some ideas from them before, and see if there's a nexus between what we're trying to achieve and what their needs are to fulfill their mission. So that might be another opportunity for the committee to get some more information from people that are actually doing the ground up construction.
Yeah.
I like
okay.
that
I
idea.
just made a note of that.
I like that.
Yeah, I just made a note of that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
So I'm taking notes while we're talking.
So this is Cindy. I think we had talked about this. I don't know if it's the last meeting or one before, but the idea of not creating new housing, but getting deed restricted housing that's, housing that's already in place. So if we worked with the senior advocates, maybe help some seniors with some tax relief, get a deed restriction, get a deed restriction for that, then we're still getting more units without creating additional units, and that may be an easier way to go around it.
Well, it's none of this, and that's a good point, and it's on here. Upgrade existing accessory dwelling units. The money go towards that. One of the important points of that is the accessory dwelling units. You only need to put a 10-year deed restriction on it in order to get it count towards the moratorium. So that's a big plus. And that might be in the moratorium. Is that right? I can't remember. But we can cross that bridge. But yes,
I think it would be interesting to talk to the senior advocates and see whether or not they have any other ideas or any other ways to use some of the trust fund money. I think we should really sit down with them at some point.
They do, don't they, Carrie? It's a wonderful
Mark
presentation.
had the idea.
I have to take myself off mute. Okay, this is Carrie. At the last minute, which is why I sent out revised regulations, I did put in a section speaking specifically to accessory dwelling units and somewhat slightly different standards than the other accessory dwelling units. I picked most of that up from Ridgefield. Thank you, Ridgefield. And but that doesn't talk about funding at all. Certainly, the ability to fund bringing existing accessory apartments or existing apartments that aren't legal but are being used as accessory apartments up to a code that is standard would be beneficial for everybody, and it would give us possibly a few units, and any number would help to count towards the moratorium. And we can discuss all of that. I mean, that's all plausible and it's all possible. It is being done in other communities. One other community that also has slightly different regulations for accessory apartments is Westport. And so this is happening. Everybody's starting to think about this at this point.
Yeah, I'm making a note here. I thought I had that illegal to legal in here, but I'm going to make a note anyway.
Yeah, no, I think
and I just say for a point of reference, Cindy, all of this has to be deed restricted. There's no deed restricted and not deed restricted.
My point is that, and all of it absolutely does, and the accessory apartments and everything else does. But, we had spoken about possibly helping seniors and working with them in other ways. So I don't think we should actually have to limit ourselves. I think if we meet with the senior advocates and they have some good ideas, I think those are areas that we should be open to.
Absolutely, and Carrie's got it all in that presentation. And if you all want to talk with them, I'm happy to see it again. That was a very good. I enjoyed it very much. But I would never take it off the list. Then that's to my point. We can't focus. We should do existing housing, yes. But if somebody walked in the door and said, "I want to do a couple starter homes," I personally wouldn't turn that down. If somebody walked in and said, "I'm going to do starter homes,"
we should just keep our options open. I didn't say turn down anything. I mean, we don't have anybody walking through the door right now, and we do have this, accessory dwelling unit proposal, and as we get to that, I think, if that's something that's going to be, we can move on quicker. I think, we take the opportunity that's available.
Well, wouldn't you all agree that the money is first comes, first served once we put the criteria together? So that paragraph, Cindy, includes all those things. But
Sheila, let me mention one thing. Under the HTF purpose, the affordable housing, you have unit size and then number of units. And I really think that new construction is beyond our capacity unless we're greatly leveraging our dollars. We've got 772, which would cover 2 new units, and so that makes no sense. That if we can leverage.
Well, that's what the money can do. It can leverage it. The money can leverage it for housing. I mean, a nonprofit developer who can get money from the state, and no, of course, the HDF wouldn't pay for all of that, but not take anything off the table, right? And the HDF also includes planning. So if somebody needed, or how about site development, or clearance and demolition. I mean, it could include all of that. So HDF could go towards that part of the project, and what it would do is, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the HDF regs probably are designated specifically in the same manner as federal funds, as if $1 is placed in a project, it has to be affordable. Does anybody know about that? Has that been, is that actually stated in the HDF regs? You follow me?
Well,
when we put a seat,
it says to provide affordable housing, and it says affordable housing within the meaning of 830G. So I think it's there. Yeah.
So within the
intentionally vague.
That's good enough. That's good enough.
Yeah,
because the criteria. Because the criteria can say.
I just say that I disagree with the first come first serve. I think we reserve the right to, if there's a project we think is better that we know is coming down the road, we reserve the right to do that.
Well, I understand that thought, but those projects can take a long time, Cindy. And if you reserve some money, unless you're just waiting for the paper or the ink to dry on the paper, you could take money off the table for somebody else who can move quicker on a project. So, yeah, for me, when I say first come first serve, I mean qualified applicant, good project, meets the criteria, and is, as we say, shovel ready.
You're ready. Yep.
That was actually Nancy and not me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You guys sound alike. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So, Sheila, the other thing that I thought the fund could be particularly helpful in doing is the first dollars are the hardest to get. Those for engineering or appraisal, some legal, maybe some site work. And so those aren't necessarily big dollars, $50,000, $75,000, but those are oftentimes the hardest dollars for, especially a not-for-profit, to get.
Yeah. So that's right in the regs. I'll cut and paste those out of the regs and put that in there. Absolutely.
Somebody has to narrow this entire list down. Practically every one of your sentences has a question mark after it. It's like there's too much here to deal with at this one moment. I mean, can this be solidified into a specific recommendation that we can look at and say yes or no? Either, Sheila, you working with Mark and Steve and come back and say, okay, we've looked at this whole thing and this is what we now think, or give us maybe 2 options that are more finalized?
May I ask who's speaking?
That's Carrie.
That was Carrie.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
Carrie.
So that's not a bad suggestion, because a smaller group could delve into this in more depth and then come back with some specific recommendations for. I thank Sheila for taking it on initially, but I think there is a lot to talk about here. So I don't think that's a bad idea. We're still in information gathering mode, but at the same time, I don't think the committee should necessarily, and I don't think anyone's suggesting, if somebody walked in the door tomorrow with a project that made sense, you would, of course, entertain it. So I think that you want to always at least be open to possibilities. If there's a project that's going on and they need to close a funding gap of $100,000, and that's going to create affordable housing, and it makes sense for the town to participate. Of course, you would want to do that regardless of whether you went through a notice of funding availability or some formal process. I think you just want to leave yourself some flexibility to consider those opportunities that do arise.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement there. I think we have to have the paperwork to do it. That's my concern, is that if you don't have the paperwork, it's not transparent enough, and, you're dealing with businesses and companies that are not too happy about handing over money from an inclusionary zoning reg anyway. So we certainly want to have the paperwork. So I think one way of looking at this, I think you're right, a subcommittee would be great to do the nitty-gritty. But I think if anybody has specific objections or additions to this list, if you could send them to me, and then I could keep a list of that. And then we could decide if we want to do a subcommittee, and I meet with one other person, as long as it's not more than 4 people. What's our total? Are we 7? Yeah.
I think we have 4 in the quorum.
3 or 4.
Yeah, so
as long as it's
3, then we could have a subcommittee. But I think that's the objective, is to have some paperwork so we can start the process.
So, Sheila, to go add on to what Carrie had suggested, I looked at this as a discussion piece. A lot of ideas on the paper, we would go through them and coalesce around certain ideas. I would suggest that each one of the members of the committee look at these 2 pages, maybe add some stuff or cross some stuff out. If they have a particular program in mind or even a piece of property in mind, we should gather those ideas so that you're not doing everything on your own. So even before the subcommittee gets together, you've gotten the input of members of the committee.
I think that's great. If you send it to me, put your name at the top of it, and do exactly what Steve just recommended. Put lines through things. If you could change the font when you add something, and then I'll just correlate the information, and it'll be a huge help for a subcommittee to get through. That's really the greatest way to have the input. Because you're right, it's too much to go through now, but these were discussion points. Yes.
Excuse me, this is Nancy. Steve, I think both you and I both did an application for the Housing Trust Fund at some point. We might want to dig that up. Yeah.
I did. I sent Sheila, but that was sort of a wide open.
Right.
And I would like to have a program to recommend, or a particular use, if possible, and then to develop the application around that, because I think that's just going to be more effective.
But we can start there,
Sheila,
Nancy.
Yeah, a question for Mark and Sheila. I'm assuming you both have a rehab program. Do you use the CBDG dollars up every year for the rehab program, or is there money left over?
It depends. Each year is different, really, honestly. The market and the economy are, and honestly, to Mark's point, staff, our capacity to push out money is sometimes better some years than other years. So it really depends. It really, really it depends on the political, atmosphere out, At one point in time, not too long ago, right in the middle of Obama's term, everybody became anti-government. So nobody wanted, either everybody wanted a grant or nobody wanted anything to do with it. So it was just, it's quite the roller coaster ride sometimes.
So the reason we're discussing this today, as we've discussed it recently in the past, is we lobbied to get the Housing Trust Fund established, and we lobbied to get the inclusionary zoning fee established, and we got to start to use the money. It's there for the purpose, and the purpose is the same purpose as the Affordable Housing Committee. And I would not want to go back to RTM February of 2021 without being able to demonstrate we've done something with the money. And so I want to fast track whatever it is we're going to be doing, so hopefully we can get something up and running.
Steve,
I agree.
On the agenda itself, under number 3, I mean, there are some things listed already that would use a very small part of these funds and at least could get us started and would be useful in terms of then reviewing some of these other proposals. Possible other uses. We've talked about this. All of these things need to happen. You know, we're not talking a lot of money, and at least something should be started with. You know, these are obviously good preliminary steps to anything that might happen in the future. So can we tonight take some sort of vote on any of those things, or just talk about it again?
Well, let's talk about them for a second. So under possible other uses, there's 4 items. One is to hire a consultant to update the affordable housing plan. I think that's a great idea. We've talked about it for a while. We
have.
Yeah, it's 20,000 or so.
There's so much change that's happened that is needs for, we have to look at this. Yeah. And this is the time to do it. I mean, COVID and everything that's going on in the economy means we really have to take a hard look at this.
Well, and let me go to the second one. The hire a consultant to review the affordability plans and annual reports. Right now it's Tpz and Mark and us. And I think if we can help planning and zoning fulfill their obligations by having an expert up from the outside come in, maybe it's not needed today, but it might be needed in 12 months or, as more of the units come online. Land banking, I think that's a good idea if we can afford it. And in fact, we might even talk about one of those ideas later tonight if we have enough time. And direct assistance, we've already talked about that regarding Operation Hope. So I'll
cut and paste those. I'll cut and paste those in. I would just say off the top of my head, if there were any, to your point, Steve, in your email last week that I responded to, where the town really needs help. Mark's got the affordability plan is a boilerplate. There's no there's no changing that. It is what it is, and it's a standard document. What all towns really need, including Milford, is somebody, and you've experienced this just recently on Westway, even though it's not 830G, somebody to go out and check the files and do the compliance that's necessary to keep the developer or the property owner, because those properties transfer, keep them in line and keep them renting or selling to income-eligible people at the correct price, whether it's a sale or a rent. That's where nobody has any time. The zoning officer will tell you that in Fairfield. What's his name?
Well, Sharon, let me ask Mark. Let me ask you directly. Has anybody ever audited any of these projects?
To my knowledge, we haven't done an on-site audit. We review the compliance plans that are submitted annually. Yeah.
But nobody's gone through the files, picked out a random number of tenant files.
Right now we have basically a small number of 830G projects that fall within that and a even smaller number of inclusionary units. So it's not a large list at the moment.
At some
what
point
you're asking for
we
is
should
an
do
audit.
that.
Yeah,
We
so
want an audit.
it'll get added to when HTF starts providing.
Yeah.
And the more often the properties change over, you're right, the compliance reports are fine. If the I's are, dotted and the T's are crossed, there's not really a reason to walk in. But it's not to say you can't. Anyway, that's just a thought. Throw it out there. I will add that list from the agenda, other possible uses, to the list of HTF list.
And so the other possible use is number one, the updating the affordable housing plan. Mark, now that the state has turned us down because we're over 50,000, is there any reason why we don't go back to Glenn and ask him to update the plan?
Well, number one, they didn't turn us down. We weren't eligible to apply. But that aside, I think you wouldn't go back to Glenn without going through some kind of process. You're not going to hire somebody at $20,000 plus without going through an RFP process, which we did before when we retained Glenn. So we could easily put out a request for proposals or request for qualifications to update the plan. In fact, we have an RFP from the last go-round. I do think there is opportunities to leverage the money in the Housing Trust Fund so it doesn't come completely out of the Housing Trust Fund. It would be better, I think, for us to be able to secure some commitment from either a foundation source or a local bank that might put some money into the process to achieve CRA points, and then we can show that we're leveraging our investment by getting some outside dollars into the process. That might take a little bit more time, but I do think it's worthwhile to do that.
Do
we
you
could have
get
somebody on
CRA
board.
credits?
I don't know.
Would
We don't
People's
get
Bank get? No, we don't. But would People's Bank or Webster's Bank?
I think there's a list of banks that are required. Meet that need to meet that.
Well, I didn't know if this would qualify, though, Sheila.
It may not. It may not. But on the other hand, we're talking about maybe getting a $5,000 grant or a $10,000 grant. That's pretty small potatoes for a bank or a foundation. If we're putting in our own $10,000, maybe it would be helpful to see if we can get some other dollars into the process.
This is dark chocolate. Sometimes we get them mixed, but I'm going to open that.
Who's talking about chocolate? Okay. Well, I think then we should really look at that. When is our 5-year update due? Isn't it next year?
Well, technically, we're beyond 5 years already. The issue is that it's absurd. First of all, that towns are expected to do a 5-year update. It should be concurrent with the Plan of Conservation Development. But that aside, there is no mechanism by which to force communities to do that as of yet. There might be something in the upcoming legislative agenda. So I think we should try to do it for next year. 2021 sounds like a good time for us to undertake it, and we could probably have somebody on board to start that process.
I've got a couple of banks I could reach out to, because we have a basic number. We think it's going to cost $15,000 to $20,000, right? Something like that. Maybe 25.
Yeah, I would say 20. The last one was a little over 20, so it's probably in that 20 to 25 range.
Yeah. And if we got $10,000 from somebody, that'd be pretty good. If we got $20,000, that'd be great. Okay.
Steve, this is Sheila. Can I ask you a question, Steve? What are you planning to do something? Are there you have some thoughts about a new plan and what you want to add to it that's different than the current plan?
Well,
I'm curious what.
Just three things. One is the need only gets greater, doesn't lessen, and so you need to go through the kind of demographics and data again. Number one. Number two, we do have a new normal, a new post-COVID world, and number three, we've got the trust fund and ideas about best practices to get those dollars effectively out into the marketplace would be good.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. How about some zoning changes?
Well, that one of those is coming up shortly. Yeah, so we're at the end of our time for the trust fund. And so I'll go back to requesting that committee members look this over carefully, send Sheila comments, questions, additions, deletions, and
don't delete. Don't delete anything. Just put a line through it. Strike through it. And then right in the middle of that purpose is what are acceptable and allowable repairs or improvements. You brought up the CDBG rehab program, and so there are very specific things that our programs will pay for. And we should really be very clear about what kind of modifications, repairs, what extent we will provide money for. And so if you could list under there what you think are allowable and acceptable repairs and improvements, keep in mind the bigger, the longer, the more expensive, but that would be helpful because that comes up a lot. And it's important to have a list of things we're willing to repair. We're not remodeling somebody's kitchen, that kind of thing, or we're not, adding on a front walkway. So CDBG doesn't pay for exterior repairs, so keep that a list of something like that would come up because if you're going to improve existing housing, those are the kind of things that they're going to throw in along with, a new egress or ADA improvements. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Mark, I would request that you must have some sort of list from your rehab program, and if that could be circulated. Am I correct in that?
What list are you talking about, Steve?
Rehab items that you would fund out of CDBG.
Yeah, it's on the website currently, and we can circulate the brochure.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So next, we're going to talk about hopefully joining with Fairfield Senior Advocates in proposing to Tpz some modifications to Section 6, which is the accessory dwelling units. And before I ask Carrie to present, Mark, I'd asked you in a prior text if you were able to give a guess on how many moratorium points we might pick up, sort of like Trumbull did, which would add another layer of demand for these kinds of changes. Are you able to make a guess?
Well, I think, first of all, any family units rented at or below 80% AMI are worth 1.5 points. So a family unit is just a rental unit that is not age restricted. And I'm not sure that necessarily, accessory dwelling units would have to be age restricted. So if that were the case, I mean, an owner, an accessory unit only works if it's owner occupied. If the owner is renting to an elderly person or the elderly person is the primary inhabitant, they don't need to place an elderly restriction on it. So in essence, I think each unit could count conceivably 1.5 points. And so if you have 150 legal apartments in here and you're able to get 25% of them or 20% of them to voluntarily place a deed restriction on their unit, if you're providing some kind of financial incentive to do so, or you're creating additional units in town by liberalizing your existing zoning, make it easier for people to do that, or providing a funding source like we've talked about through the Housing Trust Fund or from CDBG, it could quickly add up. So I think you can do the math yourself. You get 10 units, that's 15 points. Yeah. So in multiples of that, it could get quickly.
It sounds like we could get, if we got 20, 25, 30% of the existing accessory dwelling units to be in the program, that would equal the same number of points we might get from a new construction project of 4D apartments?
Yeah. And plus you're leveraging, as the committee's discussed, you're leveraging the existing housing stock. It doesn't require any new construction or disruption to existing neighborhoods for a new development. And you get the benefit of the deed restriction or the points immediately upon placing a deed restriction on the property. So you don't have to wait 2 years for the project to be completed from a construction standpoint and then occupied. So it has a lot of benefits.
Yeah. Okay. So, Carrie, with that intro.
Okay. I'm here. Okay,
sure.
I'm going to start by asking Herb Lonkohler, who's head of Fairfield Senior Advocates, who will give us a very brief introduction to Fairfield Senior Advocates for those of you who don't know about it. And then Herb and, I will speak, and Jan Reber, I believe, is online, and he will have a few comments. So, Herb, are you there?
I am. Can you all hear me?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Terrific. This will be very brief. Hi, everyone. Fairfield Senior Advocates, or FSA as we call it, is an all-volunteer, nonpartisan, inclusive voice for senior issues, and we focus on trying to keep our seniors in Fairfield for multiple reasons, but including keeping families together, and also the importance of keeping seniors for our finances, for everyone's finances. So really, we're advocates we're advocates for treating our seniors well because it benefits everyone in town. We don't have a definition of senior per se. We welcome everyone, including all advocates for seniors. We have a number of initiatives, but housing is our number one initiative, and and the biggest challenge that we all face. We all know, I think, that there are a limited number of senior-friendly options in Fairfield. We need more, and it's for reasons that you all know too well. It's a big challenge. And accessory units have been a long-time objective of ours, and our goal really is, with this proposal that we really welcome the committee's input on, is to partner with hopefully the committee and also with the FAIR Plan under Mary Hoag's leadership, if possible, in presenting a united front to planning and zoning. So once we would form and solidify the coalition, I think the next steps would probably include just fine-tuning our work and discussing it with the planning department leaders, and then presenting to P&Z. We have other housing initiatives that we'd love to share, over time with the committee, but this is an important one, and one we think, we think that the committee will share interest in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, Jan, do you want to say something now, or should I go ahead with the rest of the presentation?
Terry, I would just say, just to follow up on the point Herb just made, that we are trying to include Fair Plan in this because we see this to be seniors, some of whom need affordable housing, some don't. The Affordable Housing Committee, which is focused on affordable housing, and Fair Plan, which is really focused on representing neighborhoods and environmental issues. It kind of creates a spectrum of groups in Fairfield with a common objective to update our accessory apartment regulations. And I think it's helpful because I know we're concerned what happened the last time this was done 10 years ago, that there was pretty much public outcry about it. And I'd like us to be able to show that we've got a united public front this time of key players as we move forward.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So I'll talk about what we're proposing. I hope you've had a chance to read it all. I know it was a lot, and then I sent a slightly revised copy. But the most important thing is that this type of housing is really needed in town for so many reasons, and we somehow make it more difficult than other towns to do. And this came home to me when my neighbor across the street, who wants to expand her house to build an attached accessory apartment, had to go to ZBA for a variance because the regulations say you can't build something unless, it's like the foundation has been there 5 years already. And that's really ridiculous. So we started looking at all of this, and the impact on families and life today because of the COVID virus is huge, as you all know, as even our meeting tonight demonstrates, being unable to meet in person. And so we think that families are going to be reconsidering how they live, where they want to live, how close they want to be to their own family members, whether they want to have them included or nearby. And accessory apartments are just one more of the diversity of choices we can offer people. So we need very much, and you'll see on page 2, I speak about the diversity of these housing that needs to happen and, how we need to speak about it. And then I've made changes to the regulations, which are, I've done them the way you would when you're doing it for submission to P&Z, and then I've crossed out words and then I've added words, and those are underlined. And then I've added a couple of new sections. I mean, when I say we've all worked on this, everybody on Fairfield Senior Advocate, so it's certainly not just me. And it's mostly incremental, although I did add a paragraph about freestanding accessory apartments or accessory dwelling units, mainly to get that conversation started among all of us here tonight, because that was added at the very last minute. The demographics, I talk about that, having the elderly stay in there. And most importantly, also, it's a way of providing affordable housing, what's almost naturally occurring affordable housing, in a way that doesn't interfere with the character of the town, or maybe I don't want to use that word, but at least the infrastructure of the town. So it's a very efficient way of providing the housing, as we've all talked about. So let's just go to perhaps page 5, where I've actually started to rewrite some of the regulations, and we define accessory apartments.
Just a second before you go there.
Yeah.
Before you go there, the on the front page, that 5-year restriction, I believe we had tried to get that removed 10, 11 years ago, and the town didn't want to remove because they were afraid that it would allow people to build 2-family homes, basically. And I think that fear might still be there. And there are certain people that want to do away with zoning entirely, but that's not us. So I think that 5-year restriction, and Mark, I don't know if you've had more discussions with TPZ, but that still might be an issue.
Steve, keep in mind that there is a size restriction here that you could not build
Yeah.
a traditional two-family home under these regulations. It wouldn't allow that.
But you could do 1,000 square feet, right?
You could do
1,000 square feet would be an acceptable accessory unit. That's not a two-family house.
And we put in that it's clearly subsidiary, and that it has to maintain the single-family character. I mean, I've been walking around taking pictures, and there's all kinds of things going on, and you see houses that clearly have two front doors, but the one is always secondary. I don't know whether it's going into the kitchen or an apartment, but visually you can have something that looks like a single-family house. It doesn't mean that you're building duplexes at all. That's all controllable through the regulations.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't mean to derail your discussion plan, so please continue. I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. So we Jan, do you want to say anything about the statement of need, which that I didn't cover?
I think you did great.
Okay.
Wait, I do have something. On page 4, you talk about demographics, and that's really, really important because there's an old saying about demographics is destiny. Demographics is destiny, and so you can look at your population today and know pretty much where you're going to be in 10 or 15 years, because the middle-aged get older and the younger people have kids, and so we really do need to have an understanding of our demographics and where they're going to be in 10 years, and we should plan for that now.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So moving on then. So I took Section 6. I made some deletions. I made some additions. I expanded the size. I think I took out a minimum square footage, and I put 1,000 square feet, which basically can be a 2-bedroom apartment, but not much more. I think we had 40%.
Why did you make that change?
Because we've had in the previous regs it said, or in the existing regs, it says not more than 40% of the existing floor area. Well, if you take 40% of the existing floor area of some big houses, you can well be over 1,000 square feet. And I'm saying that nobody really needs to do more than that. So you see where it says not more than 40% or 1,000 feet of the floor area of the originally existing residence, whichever is less. So it's saying, because I think probably 9 years ago we didn't have as many McMansions as we do now. Maybe we did. I don't know. And then I took out the next paragraph, and I did add access to the accessory department may be on the front facade of a residence, provided that it is separated from the front door of an existing residence by at least 10 feet and is clearly a secondary entrance. So I would hope that would address the concern about duplexes. And the reason I put that in is sometimes when you're remodeling something, it may be better to put it on the front door. It may be that it works well on the side door or the rear door, but at least people can use whatever seems to work best for the way their house is laid out and the way their site is laid out.
And the land, There has to be some flexibility for people to work with their own properties. I agree.
To build here. And then 636, we don't want to have these being rented out as Airbnb, and we added that line there, that neither the existing house or accessory department can be rented for a period of less than 180 days. And the rest of it is pretty much what was there, except for a couple on page, I forget what page it is, but it's
7.
I didn't get a page. 7, okay. An accessory apartment to be used for affordable housing in accordance. That's where I began to put in a slightly different standards, because we do want to say that it has to be used as a primary residence whose income is equal or 80% of the state median income and the deed, and the applicant has to submit the proof, and it just goes on. This was pretty much plagiarized from Ridgefield, but that's something planners always do.
That's okay.
Adapt
it's a great addition, Carrie. It really does make so much sense to put that in there.
And then, I mean, especially if you're going to be joining us in this application. And then the other thing that is new and very quickly written, so I just marked it new, but I figured let's get this into the discussion. And there's a lot of things we could question here or discuss, but this was a start to having freestanding garages or other pool houses or garden accessory structures, as Darien notes, may be converted into an accessory apartment under the following conditions. I don't know what we would call a garden accessory structure exactly, but I'm sure there are some places where people may have offices that they built, several years ago that they might consider converting to an accessory apartment. So that's in there.
I think you should say that, we got this from Darien. I think Darien is the only town that we could find anywhere that allowed freestanding accessory apartments.
But there are some carriage houses not in Greenfield Hill that may provide people opportunities. They have pool houses and carriage houses.
People could. And if you look at the map, I don't know if it's the next page or not.
Let me ask you. So they require at least 2 acres. Would you consider slightly less than 2 acres?
Yeah, of course. I think I wouldn't go below 1 at this point, but I just put it in to get the discussion started. There were some 1 acre sites that would work on very well, others where it wouldn't. 2 acre, again, it depends on wetlands and slopes and so many other things you can't say, but I figured let's start with 2 acres, which is Greenfield Hill, in which there are already, if you were to look at like a Google map, you'd see a lot of little structures scattered around. And, that was, as I said earlier, that was typical.
Let me bring up devil's advocate. Can I be devil's advocate real quick? So 2 acres, the property value, if you're looking at income eligibility and making it affordable, if the owner has to be income eligible, that may be impossible with somebody who has an asset that's sitting on 2 acres of land.
No, I don't know. If they're building it to rent it and deed restricted as an accessory apartment, it's the rental they're going to be getting from the tenant. The renter has got to be income eligible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you got to keep in mind the audience here too. That town plan and zoning has been very reluctant to see areas like Greenfield Hill kind of atomized and the larger lots broken up. They passed new subdivision regulations about 5 years ago that were designed to keep people in Greenfield Hill from subdividing their property and putting another house behind them. And we have to be very, very careful here that we don't get down too small or TPZ is going to completely reject this because they're very sensitive to making larger properties look smaller. And I think if we stay at the AAA, at least to start with, this all came about, actually, this was Mark's idea that we include this now, and I think he really got us thinking about it. But I think we got to be really conservative initially because of the audience. Whatever we may think is logical is one thing, but we've got to sell it to TPZ.
Yeah, and 2 acres
I agree. I just want to be sure
septic.
that. Yeah.
2 acres is needed for a septic system.
And that wouldn't, the requirement or the land that is in Greenfield Hill is not on sewer. Will there be any restrictions on adding another unit?
Well, they would have to they have to talk to the health department. There are several ways not several, but there are a few ways of doing things. Anybody, is planning and zoning, getting your permit is only part of it. You've got to work with health and you've got to work with building too, so that there are certain, restrictions through the process that are out of TPZ's purview.
And that's in the regs already. It's 6.3.
Yeah, it's in the regs already.
It's in the regs about private water and septic.
Yeah, right. So, some people may not find it economically feasible to do, but they may do it anyway because they have a family member they want to live there, and they can charge that family member an affordable, something that would meet the income requirements because the family member is living on a fixed income. It would work in certain areas. I don't think we're going to be overrun with these in Greenfield Hill necessarily, or any place else, but it certainly gives people options, and that's what I think is important, because so much in life has changed. You know, we're just not in the 1950s, 1960s anymore. It's a very different world.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a good place to start, and I don't think anybody's gonna. I don't think they're gonna have an overrun on it. That's for sure. It's very particular.
No. Yeah, I think that there are some people for whom this will work very well, and other people who don't do it because they see no need to, and there may be people who do it just because they want to help create affordable housing. So we don't know.
But it gives people options, Carrie, which is, I think, which is the best thing about it. It's giving people options. And you're right. As things are changing, I think this is going to be, something that people are going to be very interested in.
Yeah, I think they will be. And, it's not a huge jump from the current regulations. It's just really making things somewhat easier. I don't think it's too much. It's about the right size. One of the interesting maps, the one map I have in here is from Emmeline's map, and I think it was either for a TOD or POCD proposal. I don't remember. It looks like it's a TOD proposal. The circles on the map, this is page 11. The circles on the map show the transit stations, and that's a 1 mile radius. But the most interesting thing to look at, you see all those little pink squares in the Greenfield Hill area? If you're looking at the map. Okay, so those pink squares, they represent what the assessor calls in-law apartments. And we're not sure that what the assessor calls in-law apartments meet are both legal or accessory apartments. So that pink square situation is really something that can be looked at after we perhaps talk to the assessor next year when Vision is through doing the assessment. I know Westport's trying to clean up the same thing, find out what would qualify as an accessory apartment or what is just something else. So the pink squares are there. Now, most of the ones that are labeled Tpz Accessory Apartments, and it's really hard to see on this map. You'd have to blow it up. But it's over kind of in the on the smaller lots in the east of Greenfield Hill, south of 15, and I can't see what zoning district it is, but there's these little blue squares there. It's very, very hard to see on this map, but those are the Tpz Accessory Apartments. And so what you see here is that there are these scattered all over town. There are not a lot in the Southport area, but there's a few. But you have all these interesting things going on up in Greenfield Hill and all over. So we need a few more of them that are deed restricted. And then the next page after that map, which is an article about what's going on today. New competition for nursery homes. That's from Axios. Was just published, I think, this week or last week, this article, and it just really summarizes what's happening and that alternatives need to get a closer look. And then I also put in the memo from Steve 9 years ago, just about, I think it's more than 9, Steve. It was August 4th, 2009, with the
11 years.
11 years, summarizing what they were proposing, what AHC was proposing at that time. And if you look at it, this hasn't changed that much. The situation is still the same, and this probably should have been adopted by Tpz then, but it wasn't. But as times are different now. So that's my summary. We've had help from a lot of people.
We need to add one thing.
What?
We have also developed a brochure. One of the things that we've talked to people about is that they don't really understand this process. People that want to develop an accessory apartment. So we've developed a brochure that could be placed on the counter at the zoning office that would walk people through what these things are all about, that would help people make a decision and walk them through the process. Because it seems simple to us, because, we look at it, we know something about it, but the average person looking to make one of these, sometimes they just walk away. So I think we'll encourage people more if we have a brochure, and we've got one that would be part of all this.
Yeah. That segues
Carrie,
into, yes.
Carrie, let me just add something that I'll point out something that was in Jim Went's report attached to the back of our recommendation from 2009. And he quoted from Jackie Durrell, who had requested people look at accessory apartments back in 1984. So that's 36 years ago. And he said that her support centered on the potential to ease the financial burden of elderly residents and to permit young residents to maintain or establish roots in the community, and that the demand for in-law apartments has become more acute due to the high cost of housing. And all of that is not only true today, it's truer. It's been exacerbated.
It's truer. It's more
today.
so. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think Jim and Emmeline would consider this. My comment.
And this is Herb again. I left out one comment. When we talked about next steps, I think one of the things we also talked about was trying to build public support for the initiative through some series of public meetings, possibly Zoom meetings, other publications, to build as much public support as we possibly could before we actually made the presentation to PNC.
Right. Well, the whole issue of support and publicity and letting people know what's out there is really a major issue that AHC should involve itself in going forward in so many ways, because people are overwhelmed with a lot of stuff, and there's a lack of clarity about so many issues. I've looked at other towns' websites, and is it Ridgefield? Yeah, Ridgefield does a really good job explaining this. They have a wonderful FAQ on their website, just really explaining how to go about getting an accessory apartment approved and what you have to do, what the approval process is. And it's basically approvals and making as much as of right as you can so that it does not require a public hearing.
This
spoke
to Sheila.
Yeah.
So it might be a good idea. Yeah, we've talked about education, workshops before, and so, we could do partner and have a workshop together and talk about the proposal of, and just in general what the senior advocates are looking to do, and what what Affordable Housing Committee is looking to do, as well as get together and have a workshop with housing developers and nonprofits and for-profits about what kind of housing is needed in the area. So type of invite the public and have this kind of discussion, or it could be 4. So there's a possible source for funding on that. The Liberty Bank Foundation, they were at the Housing Forum in Ansonia, Seymour last in January. You all might have remembered that. We never got to that discussion, but I could check and see if they still have funding, because they would fund anything that is promoting affordable housing, mini grants. So if you're interested in that, because I would like to get a workshop off the ground, I think it's important. I think we have to have that discussion for those reasons you just mentioned. The 3 of you, we do need to build support, and the more we talk about it in a positive light, from whatever aspect it is, we're going to find people who agree and are thinking the same thing, and that's where we'll have that wealth of support that pushes it through.
Okay.
I think that's good. I think
that's great.
I think that's very good idea. I think, though, before we go, Mary Hogue is on the phone, running Fair Plan, and we really need to make them part of this because it really broadens beyond seniors and affordability into more of the in touch with neighborhoods in general and on the environment here, which is critical because we're not creating a lot of new houses out of this. So there's real environmental advantages here. And Mary always has something pithy to say. So are you there, Mary?
Yeah. Am I talking? Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Yep.
Oh, I didn't know. Yeah, I just wanted to say that because I think this is such an important thing. I think using existing structures is environmentally so much better, obviously, because you're using what's already there. It's as I believe Mark said, it's also using the current footprint, meaning that you're not going to go in and try to push through something that is a new structure. So it's also then that much more palatable for people, and it allows people to stay where they are. In terms of the environment, it's absolutely so much better for the environment. And you can actually then do some upgrades environmentally, which is also in terms of energy efficiency and also much preferable. So from all those environmental standpoints and otherwise, very positive from our perspective.
Great. Thank you, Mary.
And I'm not familiar with Fair Plan. They are nonpartisan, I'm hoping.
Yeah, we're bipartisan. We're nonpartisan, however you want to phrase it. Yeah, we have a co-president. So I'm an unaffiliated voter, and my co-president is a Republican.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Do we need something like a sense of a meeting resolution saying that AHC is interested and will support this, and perhaps before the next meeting we can refine these a little bit based on your comments of any of this? Some of the wording needs to have a little bit more input, I would think. Or do we just, Mark, what would you suggest at this point?
Well, I'll say that if we're going to come back, then you don't need a sense of the meeting today.
Yeah.
And I do think you should come back with a final document.
Okay. How about if people from AHC give me, their thoughts on any of this? Cindy raised, about 2 acres. Does that need to be? I mean, please take a look at some of these, different concepts and let me have your thoughts in the next week or 10 days so we can refine this further.
Sure. This is Sheila.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I would probably, what I would write in there, and you can, and I'll read over it again, but I've never understood. Yeah. I know there's some kind of issue between accessory apartments and ADU, and you just kind of went over it, and we would probably want to hit both, I would assume, but is that something we can resolve in this as well, these accessory apartments and why they're...
Let me just say a few words about that. Right now, ADUs is the term that is generally being used to cover everything. It's sort of the most inclusive term, and people are using it for both freestanding and attached. Because Fairfield had accessory apartments in the regulations, I left it at that. Whether, I was trying to be very incremental, but that is certainly something we can discuss, and I would probably want to get TPZ's thoughts on that. I would rather use ADUs. I think some towns are still just using ADUs for freestanding units and accessory apartments for apartments within the houses we have. And, maybe we continue with both of them. I don't know that anything is written. I'll check further into that.
Oh, I see. I see what it is. But it is monitored by 2 different departments. Is that my understanding? One is TPZ and one is like assessors. Is that what I've heard in the past?
Well, there's
2 different lists.
Assessors are just noticing. They're just putting it on the tax card as an in-law apartment. We don't know how they're defining it. Whether they're defining it, as we would here in the regulations with a full kitchen, there's a whole big difference between whether you've got a full kitchen or not, which I go into in the documentation. So
are they getting a tax break? Are they getting a tax break for an in-law apartment? Why did the assessor?
They do not. No. What happens? The only department that regulates accessory dwelling units or accessory apartments is planning and zoning. Legal apartments are required to file an affidavit with the planning and zoning department each year and certify that the units are being used as intended. The assessor gets involved only in terms of valuing the property, and in-law apartments obviously provide a certain increased valuation to the property. So not everyone declares in-law apartments, so it's far from a tax break. It's actually the opposite. One of the things that we've talked about is whether or not we can provide a tax break or tax credit of some sort to incentivize people that have legal apartments to deed restrict those units so that we would get credit for them. Because right now, none of those are actually counted towards our affordable housing inventory, even though the vast majority probably are, in fact, affordable.
Can you count an accessory apartment as...
Only if you have a deed restriction.
Yeah, but it has to be... It could be a studio, but it has to have a kitchen. I mean, it has to be a dwelling.
Yes.
Yeah, in order to count it for affordable housing.
That is a good point.
So if it doesn't have a kitchen.
The state statute defines what can be counted as an accessory dwelling unit.
Yes. That sounds like a big nut to crack. But, I mean, if they wanted to upgrade their in-law apartment so that it meets the requirements that can be considered a dwelling unit by the state requirements, that could be funded. I personally am not in favor of tax breaks. Just not. I don't know how well that would go over right now, considering the current economics of the town and the revenue. I'd like to stay away from tax breaks, but incentivizing people by giving them funds to upgrade, to modify, to meet, the definition of dwelling. Yes, definitely.
This is Irv. I lost connectivity for a minute, but so those two lists that Carrie referred to before, the assessor's list and the list that Jim and Emmeline maintain, there's actually very little overlap between those two lists. So they're both roughly 250 units that are classified as in-law apartments in the assessor's database, and they're roughly the same number that Jim and Emmeline maintain, and they get the affidavits annually. But it's very interesting that there's very little overlap between those two lists. So we suspect in part it's because the assessor's interest is not so much whether in fact these would qualify for as ADUs. It's basically whatever the assessor's staff is capturing and defining as an in-law apartment. So
strictly for tax purposes. Yeah.
So that's something for us to sort of study over time, and as we evaluate the total potential universe of these of this animal going forward.
Yeah, maybe it's not something we look at right now, but it is interesting that it's two completely separate lists, and so it is, in a sense, it's a resource for the future when we want to approach those people after we already have a program, or hopefully go through and zoning passes every suggestion. So
I want to keep it clear that we're really here. I'm talking about zoning regulations, and then we're talking about housing trust funds monies, and these two may meet at some point, but in a way they're not part of each other. They almost shouldn't be discussed together as one being dependent on the other, because they're really not. The regulations could be changed, and then the funds applied or not applied. So they're both important, and they're being, at the same meeting tonight, but they're not tied at the hip yet.
Yeah, that's understood.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, Carrie, just to be clear about that, you're saying that the ADU units, the change in the regs, and the use of the trust fund dollars are not together?
You could put a program in place to upgrade existing accessory dwelling units using those trust fund monies. You probably have enough that could use some legal upgrades just to bring things up to code. And there are also what other towns have done, and this was done in Westport when I worked there maybe 20 years ago. There were a number of illegal accessory apartments where people, and this is like the Trumbull situation, where people were given a certain amount of time to fix them up and make them up to code, otherwise bad things were going to happen. So I imagine there are some apartments being rented in town, probably to family, where they really do have a kitchen and it really is functioning as an accessory apartment, but it's not up to code. So housing trust fund monies could be used for that at the present time. Am I right? Or
so I would
wrong?
like to. Yeah, I would like to be ready with that part of a discussion if we do get before the town officials. Because my goal is to increase the opportunities, but then also to increase the points too. Twofold.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we all want to get to that place.
And one other thing, if you have,
Steve, just to clarify that point, this is Mark, but yes, what the senior advocates are proposing is a text amendment to the zoning to make it easier to create affordable housing units. We've also talked about potentially using funds from the Housing Trust Fund to help homeowners make those units, but they do stand separate and apart from each other. So.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No, understood. Just that I want to be able to say something if it's asked. I want to have information in the back of my mind, the back of our minds, so that if it comes up, we're not kind of flat-footed. That's all.
Yeah, can I just say, I think we've got to be careful here. You've migrated from talking about creating new units to talking about rehabbing illegal ones in Fairfield. There are hundreds of illegal ADUs in Fairfield, without any doubt. People are very sensitive about that. I think that what we should be looking about here is what's in the text amendment, which is upgrading our regulations, and we should be focused strictly on that from a text amendment point of view. I think getting into, is it illegal? Do we upgrade it? That's a totally separate issue that I think would really make this whole thing difficult to get through if you bring up that topic.
How do you avoid that topic?
It's not relevant.
Isn't somebody going to ask you?
Ask what?
I'm just imagining that somebody at planning and zoning is going to say, well, what about those people that are not don't have legal units?
I think it's
We're not
separate discussion.
That. Totally.
Yeah. All right.
Mark. Totally.
Yeah.
It's a politically sensitive one. Again, you got to look at what's logical to us and what's feasible in a public environment are not necessarily the same thing. And I think that's very true when you start talking about illegal accessory apartments in Fairfield. I think that's totally a separate issue. But you may want to address it in the future, but I think you got to get this text through first.
Yeah, I only brought it up within the context of the fact this is potential for us. I didn't mean to get us sidetracked in bringing it up, but just in terms of the potential.
With zoning changes, definitely. But with zoning changes, the possibilities then become that people who have illegal apartments might want to legalize them.
Right,
so
absolutely.
Without, they might just come forward. So, I wouldn't bring it up either.
Okay, so Carrie, one other thing, then, if you get feedback and you're ready with a good document before our next meeting, then we can always have a special meeting.
Okay. Sure.
Our next meeting is not for a month. It is.
Okay, you'd be surprised how fast a month can go, but yes.
It's sooner than a month. It's 3 weeks.
Well, it's August 12th. You got to work quickly then, Carrie. Work quickly.
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah.
I will try.
Okay. So that is all for the accessory dwelling unit discussion. We have a few more minutes, 15 more minutes. Mark, maybe you give us a quick update on the moratorium status. How many points we're at? It hasn't changed probably from last month, but
it is not. It has not changed from the prior month. The fact of the matter is, we're tracking a lot of these developments that are construction related. So until the units are actually placed into service, they don't change the equation, which is the appeal of looking at how we can better leverage our existing housing stock, because that would actually change the equation immediately.
We're at like 350 points or 340, and we need like 435 or something like that.
Yeah, my estimate is we have 341 points towards a total required of about 433, so we're about 100 points short.
So if we did the ADU units, we'd be almost there. There we go.
Yes, that coupled with some other projects that are under construction would get us perhaps over the top.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just say in one sentence, I don't want to go into more than that, the Westway swap of the condo units over there versus off-site housing units was turned down by planning and zoning, and no new offer is on the table. We'll leave it at that. Mark, do we have anything about land banking or Operation Hope stuff or buying affordable units? Anything else to discuss?
Yeah, just very briefly, we've been in I think I may have mentioned this previously, but we've been in conversations with a few of the homeowners on the Parkview Commons site, the former Navy military housing site off of Reef Road. There's one unit in particular where the homeowner has expressed a desire to relocate. It's a prime piece of real estate for future redevelopment of the property, and we have expressed interest in acquiring it and have actually put forth an offer based on an appraisal. We're still in conversations, but I would have to come back to this body to potentially consider funding for the acquisition. And we'd also obviously have to go through town approvals to acquire a property, which would involve the Board of Selectmen and RTM, as well as planning and zoning. So it's still early, but it could move quickly. And we might be looking at it sometime August, September timeframe.
And I understand we would move quickly because anytime something's on the market, you have to move quickly, usually. So,
yes.
Okay.
Purchasing one of the units, Mark, to
well, the idea
help
is
the owner
to preserve
out.
it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not so much to help the owner out, but it's smack dab in the middle of the overall development. And if we were to consider redeveloping the property such that we might be able to demolish the existing units and raise them to the correct flood elevation so as to preserve them as affordable housing for the long term, that would, in the process, we'd probably have to add a few more units to make the numbers work. But that's the overall thought process. But we don't have a development plan. We would need to aggregate parcels. We need to get more than one, obviously, but to at least land bank it so that we have that option in the future would seemingly make some sense.
And this one backs up
to
Mark, it backs up to the adjoining street, doesn't it? So it might allow a better cut-through layout if we had 2 or 3 lots.
No, I don't think it has that potential, but it is. It's a duplex. It's a conforming duplex lot actually at present, but it is in the midst of. Previously, we had gone through a process to bring on board a private nonprofit housing developer to partner with and do a redevelopment of the site. And this is one of the parcels that we looked at that was a good candidate, but at the time the owner wasn't ready to move or to sign on to it, and the deal fell apart. So when they've changed their mind, they're now thinking of relocating. I just think it's a great opportunity for us to, have that option in the future. And worst case, if we decide not to move forward with an overall development plan, we could always, resell it to another income eligible family as deed restricted home ownership as it is today. But I think the problem with that site is in the wake of Storm Sandy, all these units are at the wrong flood elevation, and the affordable homeowners are paying through the nose in terms of flood insurance premiums, which make it increasingly not sustainable from an affordability standpoint. So I think at some point we'll have to address this. It's an opportunity for us to kind of put it aside for the time being and at least give us that option.
I think it's a good opportunity. It might give some other folks in the neighborhood, the other owners, some incentive. I would vote for, using the Housing Trust Fund towards helping some of them elevate their properties and or, as I mentioned in the past, maybe acquiring something while a house is being elevated so that they have a place to relocate to, and while their house is being got raised from the flood area, so to speak. Yeah, that's a terrible situation to have to live with, not knowing when the next flood's coming.
Okay. Good. That's it, unless anybody else has any new business they would like to talk about.
Actually, I do have one other question. Where does Operation Hope's intent? Are they still intending to buy that property? Are they still looking for funds from the Housing Trust Fund? What's the status there?
Are you talking about Ardmore or the condo?
Ardmore.
Well, Mark, I'm not sure. That's under control of Titangelo, isn't it?
No, I think he opted out not to go forward and purchase the property. So I think that's still very much an opportunity. I had preliminary conversation in the wake of the Westway decision with Carla to suggest that we would be very much interested in them pursuing it and like them to look at it seriously. But we haven't gone further than that. So I do think it's I don't think it's actively being marketed, the property. So I do think it's a potential pickup for Operation Hope at some point. I would hate for us to lose that. I do think it's a good piece of property and would be a good addition for our affordable housing inventory.
And the current owner is Tango, the man who owns Westway?
No, it is not.
No.
He had an option to purchase it.
Okay.
Or he had it under contract to purchase, but then pulled out.
Mark, do you know, does anybody in town ever use the state program HTCC?
Yes.
Yeah?
Okay. Yep. We've used it on a couple of projects. It's usually gap financing. Doesn't cover all the
but you can get a chunk of money, I think, up to $500,000.
Yeah, it has to get you have to find somebody that would take the credits, right?
Yeah, I think Eversource buys them all.
Yeah, that's usually a utility company.
Yeah.
I haven't seen $500,000, but you can usually HTCC money is part of the funding stack. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we should look at it. There's a lead time. You apply now, and you don't get the money until December. But we should think about that going forward. We should work with Operation Hope or something to see if we could plan out something like that. So, okay. Anything else? Any other questions, comments, or new business? If not, I would say have a good night. We'll close the meeting, and we'll get together again on August 12th.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank
All
you
right,
all.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.